This is Emily Hull with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library. Today is Monday, October 1st, 2018, and I'm in Lawton, Oklahoma today interviewing Jason Poudrier for the Deep Roots Oklahoma Authors Oral History Project. Jason, you're an award-winning poet, teacher, and Purple Heart recipient. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Hey, no problem.
Where were you born and where did you grow up?
So I was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and was promptly moved from there to New Jersey, Alaska, then North Dakota, and then Oregon. And so I started, I believe, it was either kindergarten or first grade in Oregon, and it was after my dad had retired out of the military that he had gotten a job in Klamath Falls.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I started grade school and all the way through high school until I joined the Army.
Okay, so you consider Oregon your home
Yeah.
state. So tell me more about your hometown. What do you remember about
So when people ask me about Klamath Falls, living there, I just remembered like a lot of high school students in whatever town they're at wanting to leave.
it?
But now when I look back, I just think about how beautiful it is there. It resides right next to Klamath Lake, which is the largest lake in Oregon, and we're surrounded by mountains in the Willamette Valley. There's beautiful campsites within 15 minutes, 30 minutes of Klamath Falls. And Klamath Falls is also known as Oregon City of Sunshine,
Mm-hmm.
and so the climate is very nice in the summers. So,
So how about your parents?
so
Or just tell me about them. But before we started the interview, you had an interesting story
oh
about
yeah,
how they meet. So you can
Mhm.
tell me what their names were,
Yeah,
what they were like. Maybe
okay.
that story.
Oh yeah. So my parents they were both in the military. My dad was Air Force, my mom was Navy, and they met in a bowling alley in England.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom decided that my dad was a good guy and she would leave the Navy to follow him around in the Air Force. And so uh, when my mom finished up her time in the Navy, so she finished up her contract and then got married to my dad, and then they came back stateside, and my brother was born first, also in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He's 2 years older than I am, and then I was born. And then my dad, uh, he finished out 22 years in the Air Force, and my mom pretty much stayed home for the most part, and worked a few odd jobs here and there until uh, finally they both ended up retiring.
What was your dad's name and your mom's name?
Okay, so my dad's is Jack Poudrier, and my mom's is Audrey Poudrier. She used to be a Corey, Corey, and she was originally from the North Dakota area,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad was originally from the New England area.
What was it like growing up in a military family?
Um, so what I remember most about being a military family was moving around a lot, which you probably
Mm-hmm.
heard
Right,
from just
right.
about anyone in a military family. Say, yeah, we moved a lot, and so I actually don't even have memories of Fayetteville. I
Mm-hmm.
have made like maybe one memory, maybe I imagine it in New Jersey.
Yeah.
But my first memories are actually of Alaska
Mm-hmm.
and playing in the snow and uh, actually when I think back of living in Alaska, I don't remember my dad much,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason for that is because he was actually stationed out on one of the islands, the Aleutian Islands, while we were there. So I
Mm-hmm.
was just living with my mom and my brother, and
Yeah.
we got real close with neighbors. And so the other thing about being in a military family and being in the military is it was great having so many close friends. So I remember
Mm-hmm.
having a lot of close friends in Alaska, and we all lived on a kind of a cul-de-sac or this kind of circle loop of roads, and there were a lot of kids, and we would ride our bikes around the circle. When the snow plows would come through, they'd put all the snow up in the middle, and then we'd slide down them. And then I was like, okay, we're gonna move to North Dakota, and then we lived in the country in a little house, and again, it's, there's some memory of my dad there, but then mainly, my mom, and then when my dad retired and he got the job out in Oregon, we weren't necessarily a military family anymore. He got a job out on base as a civilian, and then was basically from first grade on. So.
Yeah. So you said you had an older brother.
Yeah.
What's his name?
So his name is it's Jeremiah Poudrier, but he goes by Jeremy. And then he actually lives in Idaho now. So
were you guys pretty close?
Yeah, I mean, basically growing up, we were each other's best friends. There was the awkward time where he was in high school and I was the weird middle schooler. But by the time I got into high school, we actually had some electives where we had classes together, and his friends were my best friends. So he was more of the athletic type, I was more of the academic type, and so I attribute any of my athletic skill to him, because he would take the time to teach me. And so I'm like, oh, well, now I could actually play basketball, and we can play football, and because like I said, you're close, and it's he wants someone to play with, I want someone to play with, so all right.
Yeah. So you guys played sports together. Did you are you into running? Did you run together?
Well, kind of. Mainly through high school, we did a lot of basketball, and he was actually on the basketball team. I tried out my senior year, but I hadn't played any other year, so I didn't really know some of the plays and stuff. And then they were also like, we can put you on JV, but we kind of want to develop JV into our future players, and so so I got cut. But running was really something that I got into my senior year, kind of independently, and we did go for a run. He actually joined the Army for a little bit, and when he came back home after basic training, we went for a run together. But
all right, did you win?
Yeah. He could do more push-ups, but I won on the run.
Oh, okay. So. Yeah. Did you live around grandparents? Did you know your grandparents?
So I think that's another part of the military family, is we were our own little nucleus of mom, dad, brother, and myself. And so the only grandparent I really remember is my mom's mom, who would come visit us, and she visited us, I believe, in Alaska, North Dakota, and then she would go back to North Dakota. My mom's dad actually passed away before I was born, and my dad never had the best relationship with his parents, so I don't even know their names. So
you mentioned earlier that you enjoyed school when you were younger. What were your interests when you were young? Your favorite subject in school growing up?
So I mean, I always liked art, and enjoyed writing. When I was in elementary school, I was pretty good at math all the way through middle school, and basically I enjoyed learning until probably about my junior year, and got my driver's license and started a job and decided I had other priorities.
Oh, that happens. So what did you dream of becoming when you were a child? Was it to be a writer or something else?
So growing up, like, I always wanted to be like everything. Like, I wanted to be a firefighter, and it's actually really big up, not just like the general sense of firefighter, but like a wildland firefighter, which is big up on the West Coast. And growing up, I never really considered much of the military. I knew like I wanted to, be a teacher, but I figured I'd do that after I got done doing everything else I wanted to do, and start my own business and do all these things, and then after I did all that, I would write about all of it. So.
Okay. So after you graduated from high school, and that was in Oregon.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. What'd you do next?
So actually, I immediately shipped off to basic training.
What year was that?
So it was 2001.
Okay.
So like when I turned 16, that was actually my first day at my first like real job, and we had like I'd mowed lawns before that. We had delivered papers before that, but I turned 16 and I started working at a restaurant. And it basically became a full-time job, and I was working up to management by my senior year, and then my senior year I also realized I don't want to be a restaurant manager all my life. I looked at the life that my restaurant manager was living, and I was like, I don't want to do that. And then I looked at what my grades were in high school what I finished out with, and I thought, okay, I have to do something. And my brother, who had joined the military, like I said, right before I did, had told me about how the Army was going to give me like $50,000 for college, and there could be a signing bonus. And I thought, I'm going to go talk to the recruiter. And so I went in and signed some paperwork. Actually, I think I was actually still, I think it was the summer before I became a senior. And so he set up a date where I would ship off. And even up to that date, I was like, well, I could still change my mind, And then as the date got closer, I was like, no, I want to change. I want to do something. And then also, when I go to college, I want to be able to focus on college and not work like I did in high school. And it's like, all right, so 4 years, I can do this. So I graduated in May, or actually it was either May or June for graduation. I shipped off in July.
Okay, of 2001.
Of 2001. Yeah.
And in September.
Yeah.
Happened. So tell me, where were you, and what was that like, and what do you remember about that day?
So I was in basic training.
Okay.
And so of course, like, I talked to my parents about it. My mom was like, you don't really want to join. And my dad's like, well, if you want to, go for it. And, there haven't been any wars lately, so you're probably good for 4 years. And then I'm in basic training, and the drill sergeants said, okay, some planes have hit the Twin Towers. And actually, before the drill sergeants said it, there were some rumors amongst the other basic trainees that something had happened, but no one was like, no, there's no way. And even when the drill sergeants first said it, we thought they were trying to set up like a hypothetical situation to get us to take training more real, like. Wow. And then they said, okay, we're gonna allow you into the drill sergeant office, which is where you do not go. And where there's a TV in there, and they were actually showing us, the footage, and so we could actually see that it was indeed really happening, that they weren't just making this up, and but we got to see it for like 5 minutes, and then we shifted out, and the next group went in to watch, and they watched it for 5 minutes, and then the next group comes out and says a second plane hit another tower. Like, oh my gosh. And so the drill sergeants kind of keep us informed, but we didn't miss a day of training. We continued on with our training. They told us about how Fort Sill had been put on lockdown, and how it would take them 4 hours to get on and off post, and but we were kind of sheltered from everything that was going on because our training schedule didn't change. So
the mood for everyone, was it shocked, or?
I think so. I think it became, for a lot of us, oh, and we're in the army, and
Yeah.
and now things could happen. But
Hmm.
at that time, I mean, there was no real idea of what would happen, but just the idea of like we could go to war and I'm in the army. But
Hmm.
at that time that it happened, you know, from July through September, there is this idea of, as you're going through basic training, whether you join for college, which is one of the main reasons I joined,
Hmm.
or or just to serve, this kind of pride of service comes in. And so there's the idea of, well, we could go to war, and okay, well, that's my job, and well, if we go, then yeah, like I want to be called up because that's what I'm a soldier.
Right.
So
Yeah. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit to when you first started training in Oklahoma. What were your first impressions of Oklahoma when you moved
okay.
here? It has to be a little different.
Yeah, so I came to Oklahoma in July, and
No.
so the first impression is it
I
is
should laugh.
hot here.
Yeah.
In that summer, I think we've since beaten the record, but we were working on a record for setting the most 100 days in a row.
Hmm.
And I just remember how hot it was. And of course, like, coming to Oklahoma, it was also coming to Fort Sill, which Fort Sill is actually kind of a beautiful place in
Hmm.
Oklahoma. It's nestled right into the wildlife refuge, and there's still mountains and trees, a different
Hmm.
kind of trees than what I was used to. Um, but I just remember, like, I've never felt this much heat before,
Hmm.
and we would, in the evenings, we'd be shining our boots out on the drill pad and be thinking that it's 9 o'clock at night and it's still hot.
Yeah.
What is this? The sun's not up.
Hmm.
Because that's one thing about in Oregon is that even though we might hit 100 degrees by nighttime, it's down to the 60s or 50s, and
Hmm.
it's, you have a campfire and things are nice, and you
Yeah.
wake up in the morning and it's cool. So
Then you went to Iraq.
yeah, yeah,
So tell me about that. So that happened in 2003,
yeah,
right?
2003. So in the lead up uh, to deployment, uh, here in Oklahoma, I was in Charlie Battery,
Hmm.
and which was part of 3 Corps Field Artillery, and uh, for my particular MOS, which was 13 Mike, which is MLRS, or multiple launch rocket systems. When I first joined up, they showed me a picture of it, and it's this huge tank that shoots rockets. I thought, okay, that's cool.
Hmm.
And then you get into the job and you realize that, well, you don't get to shoot rockets right away. It just kind of depends on where you get placed within your battery. And so for the first 2 years that I was in, or first year and a half that I was at my unit, I was in an ammo platoon,
Hmm.
and so I was hauling the rockets around for the launchers. And then towards the tail end of let's see, 2002, I got moved to a launcher, and as a launcher crew, you get certified as a crew, and I actually got swapped out from my crew to another crew as they were building up Charlie Battery for deployment. Well, it was pretty obvious at that time that something was happening with Charlie Battery,
Hmm.
because where every other battery had like half of what we were supposed to have, they took up like half of like the PT field. Like
Oh.
they were they were getting staffed to go somewhere. Um, and I was like, well, if they're going somewhere, I want to go with them.
Hmm.
That's who I was a part of. And so I volunteered, and there was somebody who his wife was having a baby or something,
Hmm.
and so they swapped me out, and he took my spot, and I took his spot, and I returned back to my ammo platoon, and that was in December. I think that was right in December. And so they had already started going through some pre-deployment stuff, so I was had to kind of rush through that, and then in January we shipped out, and at that time, being a single soldier, living in the barracks, they hadn't quite figured out what was the routine yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so they knew they had to get all of our stuff in storage. So we put all of our stuff in storage. And so then we just had like a mattress in our barracks room to sleep on for the night before we deploy. And so, yeah, we're like, okay. So I had made a deal with a soldier in another battery that I had met that I'll buy a blanket and a pillow,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll use it. And then you meet me, when I get called up, and I'll give it to you. And if you need to use it, and we would pass it on to whoever else needed it. So we got called up, and so that night, slept on the mattress. Since then, they've created plans, so it's not so random. Yeah, it's like, yeah, well, you're going to deploy, but the night before you deploy, you get a mattress and nothing else. So they've since adjusted that and addressed it. But we were the first battery deploying out of Fort Sill,
Mm-hmm.
and so we have everything packed up, and we're on a plane. And we flew through, I believe, Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
Was a holdover, and they had like a little corral for us that we couldn't like leave out of a certain area of the airport till our next flight hit. And immediately, people started playing spades and cards because
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's what we had seen and what we heard you do when you're going to war. You play cards, so we played spades. And then we landed in Kuwait, and for us, we actually deployed without our equipment, so we drew out our equipment from Kuwait. And I remember we all got put onto a bus to go get our equipment, and it's like this bus that's like lined with velvet inside and like little like tassels around the windows and stuff, and they have this weird movie playing. It's like music, and I don't know. And so we go and we draw out our equipment, and the vehicle that me and my driver were supposed to drive out actually had issues, so we couldn't draw it out. So we were vehicleless, and then we lived in a huge tent, like a big rectangular circus tent, for about a month in Kuwait. And then during that time, we did different training missions, and it was still at a time where you had to wait an hour or two in line to make a phone call, and you waited an hour or two in line to eat, and everything was just kind of like waiting for this and that.
Yeah.
We finally got our vehicle working, and for the most part, and then soon after that, we left our huge tent into some littler tents where we had little 3-man tents. And then at about that time, we were starting to realize that, okay, I think something's going to happen, because obviously we've deployed to Kuwait, but it was still on training orders, Desert Spring.
Mm-hmm.
And then after we moved up right to the border and we're living in little tents, and then they issued us like live rounds, and we're like, we're not the Marines. We don't train with live rounds. We're not that crazy right now. But we realized that something, that things were going to go down. Things were real.
Yeah.
Like I said, as I think the higher ups knew more of what was going on, where I was just enlisted. I was a PFC at the time, just got promoted to specialist. But they told us what they had to tell us.
Right.
And then one night, the officer comes down and he calls us all into like the command tent and starts flipping down maps and says, okay, we're going to drive from here to here, from here to here, from here to here. And it was all the way up into Baghdad.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, okay, that's our mission. You need to load up. We're rolling out. And so we loaded up and rolled out and went across the border into Iraq.
Yeah. What do you remember about that?
So, basically not sleeping, not eating, and crossing over the border was most vivid memory is, for one, there was a huge berm that had been engineered between Kuwait and Iraq, and so I remember just this huge sand berm, and we're going basically down this road through it, and then when getting to the other side, seeing a bunch of Iraqi children just like looking at us begging for food. And we had been told beforehand not to give them any, because then they would approach the vehicle, and we wanted to stay away from the vehicle. And which is why in one of the poems I have that we drove by with our weapons aimed out our windows, is that's what we were told to do. And so you just try to not make eye contact and just drive through. And then the idea of like we're going to combat, like then it becomes real that either I could be killed or I might have to kill someone. And basically everything was a blur from the time that we crossed the border until the time that I got wounded. So,
did you keep a journal while you were there? Because your poetry is so vivid and specific with the detail.
I kept a loose journal. I was worried, like if I get captured, how much do I want to have written down in my journal? Also, I was worried about how much do I want to put down of my actual thoughts versus just what's going on. So I tried to capture a little bit of just like what was going on. Like, there was a Scud missile launched at us. It was shot down. We moved from here to here, but I didn't put a lot into the journal.
So as you were writing the poems for this collection, how did you remember all of that?
So I think a lot of it, just like with any traumatic experience, I mean, just the experience just gets ingrained. And so a lot of the poems within Redfields come from intrusive memories that wouldn't go away, that were as real as if they were happening. And so I decided, okay, well, what if I capture these in writing? And one of the things that I found was that in capturing them in writing, it almost gave them a voice and a reality that I wouldn't forget them. So that it's not like they had to keep reminding me, like, hey, don't forget this happened. It was like, okay, I'm not going to. It's written down. And then the other part was being able to look at them through a poetic lens. Now, how do I look at this poem and craft it into a poem, and not just look at it as the experience, but how do I, play up alliteration and consonance and assonance and rhyme if I'm going that way, and imagery, and how do I make it to where my experience is as real as possible for somebody else to read, and so they can get the experience and go through the emotions without actually having to really go through it.
Yeah.
So
that creates some kind of emotional distance for you in a way, once you started focusing more on craft level issues.
I mean, I still, it took me a while to I guess be able to write alone. Like I would, and that's where I found the university to be wonderful, is because I could go to the Center for Writers and I could write. In the writing classes, I could write, and I wasn't like left alone to just sit and okay, let me sit alone and reflect on these times, or let these emotions or these intrusive memories just hit me. Like I would go to safe places to work on them, and write through them, and like I said, being able to look at them in a way that I'm turning this into a poem versus anything else, that this is going to be a poem first, and then taking everything that I was learning in my poetry class, and then layering that on top of my memory, basically.
So when did you start writing the poems for this book? Did it start in when did you begin that?
So I actually did write, and I actually, like, when I first came back from overseas and I was in a hospital, and I'd gotten a chance to talk to my parents. I think it was either my dad or mom that said, you should write down as much stuff as you remember. And so I did take a little bit of time to kind of write, I don't know how many pages. I mean, it wasn't a lot, but just about what I remembered about the event. and so I had that in a kind of a journal. Um, but the first like war poem that I wrote was, I'm trying to think, that it was probably 2005, 2005 or 2006. Yeah, in a techniques of poetry class here at Cameron University with Dr. Morris. And so the first poem that I turned in for his class was actually one that I had revised, that I had written back in high school because I wasn't sure what I was doing. And I was like, well, my creative writing teacher that I had for 1 year at high school thought this one was good, so I'll turn it in. And then we, as we learned different techniques, and he really wanted us to write something new. And so I wrote Baghdad International, and so that was kind of my first poem, which turned into almost like an ode to the Light Brigade type poem. And I remember writing it and thinking, okay, there's my war poem. I'm all done. I thought, there's my story. And I added some stanzas, took out some stanzas. I remember Dr. Morris telling us about how, he would revise poems like 40 times or 100 times, and I'm like, that's too many. And that poem's been revised at least 40 times. Just endless. And then I remember, like, out of that poem, and like some of the stanzas that would go in and then come out would turn into poems of their own. And then also how that was kind of like what I felt was kind of like the story of our unit. And of course, like, I fictionalized some stuff in it, and but I realized that there were so many more experiences that I wanted to write about, and so I kept writing about them. And then also I found that other people would kept encouraging me to write and to write about it, and I found like that was where my writing was heading. If I'd start writing and I was like, oh hey, well, I'm writing about that the military again. Okay, I'm just gonna go with it.
It's funny how that all can kind of work together. What I found interesting about your book, Redfields, and just thinking of war and how it's depicted or discussed from, and maybe how a civilian like me who will never experience what you did might take away from what you write about. It made me kind of think about a soldier's experiences, and not just the combat situation, but other parts of what you did. For example, what happened in your downtime. So as you're waiting for the next, you mentioned earlier how much waiting was involved in this. So how did you deal with downtime or with loneliness or with boredom?
Yeah. So at the time that I was overseas, I mean, we were very kind of secluded as far as like, technology and everything. So we, we had cards, and so we played a lot of spades. In fact, it got to a point where you would have your spades partner that you would play with, and you'd come back from guard and your partner would be somebody else, and it was almost like they were cheating on you. like that's how like ingrained your partnership and your friendship would become, and you're like, wait a minute, no, what's going on here? And then like for me, as being part of the field artillery unit, and being attached to an ammo platoon, and then being stuck in a truck, there wasn't a lot of loneliness because you were attached to one other person who was either the driver or would be the person riding in the truck. And so you were kind of connected at all times. And then at guard, you were on guard with at least one other person at all times. And so there actually was very little alone time. And whether you got along well or didn't get along well with the guy you were with, you learn to just work together and get through it. And I think something that I think the world needs more of is just, you guys can hate each other, but you can get along and you can accomplish a mission and you can actually be friends.
Yeah.
And so me and my driver had kind of a dynamic relationship.
Oh yeah.
But now, I mean, we're just forever, connected, and I know he has different views than I do, but it's like, I know he's a good guy. I mean, he was willing to die for me. I was willing to die for him.
Yeah.
So.
And this might be kind of related, but there's a poem called High Stakes.
Yeah.
Does that kind of address what we were talking about?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. High stakes. And then while we were waiting,
Yeah.
because one of the things that I tried to do too is you had mentioned earlier about kind of like the kind of human aspect of war. Was, and I'll probably have more writing that I'll do about this, but the the kind of happy times. Because I mean, I mean, you can, I didn't think it'd be right to write about war and just have all the ugliness of it. That I wanted to have that human experience of, in that poem, this high stakes game of poker that's going on, for peanuts and cigarettes and chew, and you're paying $40, which, a can of peanuts versus $40, but it's like, well, I haven't got a care package, so all I got is $40, and so to see what would happen in that event, and then also, I mean, and while we were waiting, there was the playing pranks on each other. And just to kind of keep each other's spirits up, and especially I think with being lower enlisted, we were able to kind of get away with those things, and the NCOs didn't really say much, and it was like, we're already not getting much sleep, so let's just get even less and play a joke. Why not? And it's just kind of that camaraderie of, it's our tent versus their tent. Well, they they sabotaged ours. How are we going to sabotage theirs? And then until like the NCOs were like, hey, something real's about to happen like tomorrow, so like no jokes, like we're good, like you guys need to like rest up because something real is going to happen. Yeah. And so then we had to be like, okay, we gotta let
the Martha Stewart one.
We call Martha Stewart. So that one I actually heard about afterwards. Because I was wounded before my unit got into Baghdad, but even before that, there's those soldiers that they're just amazing at just making things like home, even though you're in the desert. They're like, hey, we're not gonna get rid of that box, we're gonna use that box and we're gonna use it to like store stuff, and then we're going to hey, we got so much plywood, let's build some something out of it over here. Like we had a picnic table that was built from scratch, that it was like that's where like all like the dominoes got played. It was the domino table, and so it was those soldiers that they were able to be like, okay, well, we're in war. That doesn't mean things have to be terrible. Let's make things as nice as we can. And so when I came back, when I had gotten back with the unit, I kept hearing some of the other soldiers refer to some guy as Martha Stewart, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And then they finally told me, and I was like, oh yeah, makes sense. But and then they had told me about how he was the guy that tried to make things like nice, and it was like, it's nice to have that person.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, sure. We talked about this a little bit earlier. I think you have a poem called Iraqis where you're talking about kind of meeting the children. How did you deal with those situations where, I mean, just like personally or others that were around you, with knowing that there were people who might have needed help but you couldn't help them?
So like at that time, like, I mean, I was 19 years old, and like I wasn't too far removed from basic training, so I was
Mm-hmm.
still very, here's your orders, here's what you do.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, don't give them any food. I'm like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
weapon out the window. Okay. And like like I said before, it's kind of like, well, how do I either not look but actually still look because I'm on guard.
Mm-hmm.
And then I
Right.
guess that's why, like, those are some of the, like, the images that are the haunting ones,
Mm-hmm.
because those are the ones that are the hardest to
Yeah.
see, like, wow, this kid has nothing. And then I remember seeing, like looking, and not seeing any of the adults. It
Mm-hmm.
was just like, it was like
Yeah.
land of the Munchkins. It's like,
Uh-huh.
it's and then it's not like there were any houses nearby. It was just like Iraqi
Yeah.
children in the desert. Like, they just came up out of the sand, and it's like,
Be
okay,
strange.
yeah. And then afterwards, they briefed us a little bit just about how, like, the parents were there, but like we were more likely to get food to the kids, so it's kind of like a manipulation type thing.
Um,
And then the whole idea that they told us was that, our mission is to liberate them. Humanitarian aid's coming from behind, so, don't give them food. Someone will be giving them food. So it was
mm-hmm.
kind of like, so I just had to, like, I guess, grab onto that
Right.
okay, someone's going to feed them, so
Okay.
I don't have to. And
That's kind of a way to prepare it yourself mentally
yeah.
for it, or maybe for combat too. Maybe just thinking of it as your mission, your routine. Did you think too much about what it might be like once
um
you're actually fighting?
I, I guess a little bit. I guess,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had, they briefed us a little bit when things were getting real, and there were guys who were like, "Oh, I'm scared," or "I'm not scared." And then finally, I think it was, I think it was our first sergeant who said it. I'm not sure who said it, but it was like, if you're not scared, there's something wrong with you. Everyone should be a little bit scared, uh, and you know, there was a thought process of, okay, well, something happens to me, and it's like, well, um, I'm covered for $250,000, and so I guess my nieces and nephews will go to, college, and at the time, I mean, I was a single soldier,
Yeah.
which is what they say, you're a single soldier, and meaning I didn't have a wife or kids or anything,
Right.
and I didn't. I don't think I realized how much impact it had on my parents,
Mm-hmm.
because I saw myself as, I'm an adult, and I'm
Right.
independent, and I didn't view myself as a son,
Mm-hmm.
until
Yeah.
much afterwards. Uh, and so for me at the time, it was like, well, I'd rather it be me than this guy next to me who's got a family and kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm better for something to happen to.
Oh.
So uh, so that's the way, I guess, I kind of looked at it.
Yeah. So you received the Purple Heart.
Yeah.
What would you like to say about the circumstance that led to
Um,
that?
yeah,
It's kind of a big question.
yeah. That I mean, there's nothing, I guess, that has to do with valor in the Purple Heart. That it's
Mm-hmm.
simply, you were wounded overseas.
Right.
And so a lot of people are like, oh, well, you got the Purple Heart. It's like, oh, yeah, I was wounded overseas. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we should have gotten a Bronze Star or something. I'm like, no, like, that's for something valorous. A
Mm-hmm.
valorous act. Uh, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time,
Yeah.
and so the main thing that happened, not the main thing, but
Mm-hmm.
it was a lot of miscommunication, and the 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 story, or the facts that I was told, that I got in a briefing when they briefed one of the widows that I got to be a part of and listen in on, was that the Army shot down a Navy jet, and then they called the Air Force to try to destroy whatever shot down the Navy jet and possibly find what happened to the pilot. Well, the Air Force then came back to find out what happened. And then my unit, which is, like I said, MLRS, we shoot rockets and they go up and then they go down range. Well, we shot a rocket and then an Air Force bomb got dropped on our unit. And we lost 3 guys, and I was one of 5 that was wounded.
What do you remember in the aftermath of that? Like, just what was it like recovering, or is it something I'd rather just not think about?
I mean, I've come to a point now where I'm more comfortable about it, and it's, I think, large part due to the writing and as well as therapy and different things. I guess one of the first things was laying in the sand, and I'd been told by some buddies later that I was actually face down, and they actually turned me over to where I was face up, which was nice of them. And they asked me if I was okay, and apparently I told them I was. And I hadn't come to yet. And so what I remember is yelling for my driver, in which case then he comes around and he's like, all right, hey, we got to get up. We got to spread these vehicles out. Because the last thing I remembered before being on the ground was us shooting the rocket and my vehicle being entirely too close to the MLRS that just shot a rocket. And I had thought I was thrown by the blast of us shooting a rocket. And what had happened to another unit was a rocket had swirled around back on itself, but it hadn't hit anything. And I thought, oh, one of our rockets just went haywire, and now there's an explosion. And that's what threw me. So I got up, and I had to ground guide the vehicle forward, which is walking along the ground while the vehicle is kind of following along. And either before or after that, I had taken off my gear and started looking for holes to see if something had hit, gone through anything. And then all of a sudden my legs started getting really, really tight. And then all of a sudden I started feeling liquid running down my legs. And then I became famous for the line, either I shit myself or I'm bleeding. And so I climbed up into the vehicle and got some toilet paper in case it was the, one or the other. And then that's when I reached down and realized that I was bleeding. And then I told one of the other guys, I'm bleeding. And then they're like, well, we need to get you to the triage. And what he tells me is that he told me which way it was, and I started walking the wrong way, so he had to turn me around. And then I have no idea how I got there to the triage place. I remember someone saying, at the time I was in the military, my nickname was Poudrier, because Poudrier is hard to say. And I remember someone saying, oh, not you too, Poudrier. And I remember laying down, and then I was insistent that something was going on with my right thigh, and then something was going on with my left calf. Well, my left calf, it was just because of where it hit the muscle and the nerve that it felt like the pain was in the calf. And they're like, there's nothing wrong. And then they realized that I'd actually got hit by shrapnel in both my legs. And one piece came in the side of my right thigh and went out the back, and the left piece had actually just lodged in there. And then basically I remember going in and out of consciousness after that point, and they had moved me because the triage, I guess, was too close to where the Humvees that got hit were, and the rounds were starting to cook off, so they moved us. And I remember asking, is everyone else all right? What's going on with this person? And no one wanting to tell me anything. And finally one guy was like, okay, this guy's dead. And so then in one of the poems, I kind of captured this moment where I slid in the back of a deuce and a half along with Sergeant Robbins. And I remember thinking oh, hey, he's all right, or he's going to be okay. And then realizing that no, he's not. And then I blacked out. And then they got us to the medevac point and went on, I think it was at least 3 different Black Hawks till I got to, I think, a hospital somewhere in either northern or southern Iraq or northern Kuwait, and going through different field hospitals.
So this next question is going to kind of fast forward
Okay.
through your education and get to what you're working on now with your PhD, because
Okay.
I'm listening to this experience and kind of reflecting on your book that I've read, and I, when you read your work, it's just so vivid and emotional and striking, and it just kind of sears into a stranger's imagination. So I can't imagine what that was like to experience that and recover. So kind of on that note, one of your research interests is looking at the connection between creative writing and resilience.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that and kind of connect kind of what we were talking about with that experience to
so one of the things that I found personally was that as I was capturing intrusive memories, writing them down, it helped. And to keep the intrusive memories from constantly reoccurring. Although every once in a while, like someone would be like, "Hey, don't forget about me," and it's like, "Okay, got you in a poem." But what I never realized until the book actually came out was what happens when you actually publish, and when I say publish, I mean make public in any way, those thoughts and those memories, especially like how mine were so personally connected. Before I wrote it, there was a lot of shame and guilt, and then when you talk about like the Purple Heart, and it's kind of like, well, most of the time that's if you get hit by enemy fire, or with the policy if it's friendly and they think it was, and if they thought they were indeed shooting the enemy and whatnot. So having all that and then being like, okay, this is my story and I'm not going to be ashamed of this. And then sharing it with other people and getting a positive response, and people saying, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for writing this. Thank you for, no condemnation, no judgment, and realizing that I was judging myself and other people weren't judging me based on these experiences. So then it became, so how can I help other veterans to have the same experience, that they can go through this process. And so I started leading some workshops, got to be involved with the Oklahoma Arts Council, got involved with Military Experience in the Arts, a national nonprofit, and realized that this is what this is what I want to do. Like this is where I see my life going. Like I want to help other veterans. I want to connect them with ways that they can share their experiences in healthy ways. And the flip side of that is when they share their experiences, that hopefully other people will read those firsthand accounts and realize that war is not a solution that should be gone to, unless extreme dire circumstances. But like I said, through the process, like I found that, okay, I found creative writing afterwards. What if I wouldn't have taken that poetry class, or if I didn't have that inclination? Would I have healed as much? Would I be an emotional state that I am now, where I'm comfortable talking about things? And so how can I connect others that don't feel pre-inclined to, I'm going to write poetry about my war experience? Right. Oftentimes for many people, those seems like two, separate ideas. Make art out of war, what? And I think we're kind of in a revolution about that, but at the same time, it's something that's always existed. Going back, into Greek mythology, Native American mythology, it's been around forever. And so it's not a new concept. It's the separation of arts and being is a new concept. And so my idea is, well, what if we reintegrate arts as a part of being, and as that art as part of being becomes, helps people become more resilient to trauma, because art gives people a way to express themselves that they're not taught through any of the other academic disciplines. That art can come out of creative writing, that it can come, or that art can be creative writing, or visual arts, or vocal arts, that it's a way of expression. And if we're not teaching students expression, then we're not teaching them how to process emotion, and how to think through difficult experiences, and not giving them ways to take difficult experiences and turn it into something positive. And so that's where my study goes into, of course, with a dissertation, you have to kind of hyper focus it into creative writing and resilience with veterans, to see if there is indeed veterans that are out there who had creative writing experience before they went overseas, and how did that assist them in processing their experience during, versus having to deal with not knowing how to process it after, and then kind of stumbling upon the arts as a healthy therapeutic way.
Right.
So
I wanted to ask you about the cover of your book. Can you
yeah.
Make sure I can get it in here. So you illustrated that.
Yeah.
Could you tell me about that image?
Yeah. So my senior year here at Cameron, I decided to take a drawing and design class, because I'd always liked art, and both creative writing and visuals. And I decided, my senior year, I'll take a fluff class, or creative, a design class, and it was not fluff at all. And I'm glad it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so we got into charcoal, and absolutely fell in love with working with the charcoal and how it felt. And for our final, we had to put in at least 30 hours into our final. And so part of that was like the process of time. And so I had gone over with my art instructor, Catherine Leontis Warren, who's amazing, kind of what I wanted to do and different ideas. And at first it was going to be a sculpture with a brain, and then there was going to be barbed wire, and it was going to be like the brain was going to be the battlefield, and then but it wasn't really turning out. And then she was like, well, what if you if you focus it this way? And then I decided that I would take this Roman soldier and blow off the top of the head, and put all the weapons that I dealt directly with, aside from the pineapple grenade, because that one was just kind of visually appealing. We had a different type when we were in Iraq. But so the last weapon I carried while I was overseas, well, not while I was overseas, but while I was in the service, was a squad M249, automatic weapon. And so that's where the chain of bullets and the M249. When I was overseas, I carried an M16 with a 203 or grenade launcher attached to the bottom of it. So that's that part. And then when I was overseas, we had to they actually issued us bayonets, which you don't ever, aside from bayonet training and basic training, like ever see the bayonets. And so then that's when it's like, we may have to do close hand-to-hand combat, which then you like, well, that's why I joined field artillery, so I'd be back here. But so the idea of how real things were, so then that's where we got the bayonet. And then this right here, which kind of almost looks like a bottle of alcohol, is actually what I found online of a 500-pound Air Force bomb with the laser guiding part of it on the front. And so that's where that part is, of course, shrunk down. And then, of course, the playing cards from spades. And then I chose the queens in order to kind of signify relationships and girlfriends. And, and of course, the bayonet's kind of coming down, which is like the divorce. And then, of course, the fog of war idea of how nothing's really clear of what's going on. So.
And while we're looking at this image and thinking of the title of this book, one of the themes that this oral history project explores is what is home and what makes home home. And when I read the poem Redfields, I found the way you blended Oklahoma and Iraq, it was just so unique.
Yeah.
I thought, do you mind reading that one?
Okay, sure.
Real quick.
Redfields. My feet sink into the barn-stilled soil of my father-in-law's Oklahoma land, reminding me of times before I met his daughter, when I drove along in a tank convoy towards Baghdad at the same pace as a tractor over an unplowed field. With each stop, we would have 15 minutes to dig 2 foxholes with e-tools better designed for digging 1-foot by 1-foot cat holes. When the sand was soft, like the overworked edges of the short rows of my father-in-law's fields, it was a blessing. We'd dig our holes deep, safe, to plant ourselves into if we came under fire, so we could rise out when the lead rain ended. When the sand was as hard as the unworked ground hiding under the buffalo grass, our e-tools would chink at the surface with every hit. Our holes would be shallow, and we'd push the sand up around the perimeter, making a false reservoir of safety, knowing bullets would penetrate the powdered walls if we were ambushed, and our bodies would lie half exposed in shallow graves, in pools coloring the sand Oklahoma clay. When his daughter was only a pin-up girl in my mind, the sandstorms would erase the foxholes after we pushed forward. Now I drive my father-in-law's tractor and set the plow into the soil to cultivate his land.
Thank you. So what are you working on currently? I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
switch up.
So currently I'm working on a lot of fiction, and still writing poetry, but really I'm trying to put together a short story collection of characters, based a lot of on guys who I served with, but then of course compilated down into their own unique characters, and trying to create kind of a longer narrative and story that encapsulates the experience that a unit goes through when they're hit with friendly fire, like ours was.
What's the best writing advice you've ever received?
Read.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was I was afraid to pick up the things they carried, and after the first story within the collection, I was hooked, and to see as a veteran, what another veteran can do with the stories of war, and to really tell them in a real honest way, not the way that people want to hear, but the way that things really happened, changed my life. And picking up Kurt Vonnegut and knowing that, I could also address PTSD with aliens called Tralfamadorians. Read the greatest things that are out there and to steal their techniques.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about today?
That's about what I got.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you. Thank you for having me.